The whole town of Sorrel Creek had decided to pity Maren Doyle, and they were enjoying it the quiet way small towns enjoy a sorrow that belongs to someone else. Only one man in the county looked at the widow about to sell her hair and saw something altogether different. Not a woman at the end of her rope, but the proudest soul he had ever known. And he was not about to stand by and let that pride be cut off and sold for the price of a wig. But that comes later. First there is Maren and the long hair and the debt. She had been a widow for 11 months, which in Sorrel Creek was long enough for the casseroles to stop and the pity to set in like a stain. Her husband, Wesley Doyle, had been a horseman, a patient, gentle-handed man who could read a colt the way other men read scripture. And he had died the way the patient ones too often do, thrown not by a wild horse, but by a tame one on a slick morning, his neck broken before he hit the ground, leaving behind a small holding at the foot of the Sorrel Hills, a string of half-trained horses, and a note at the bank with one payment left that he had meant to make in the spring he did not live to see. Maren had buried him on the rise behind the house, where he could see the horses, and then she had set about the business of not losing everything they had built. She was 34. She had a straight back and a steady eye, and a rope of dark hair so long and heavy that when she let it down at night, it fell past her waist. The one extravagant, beautiful thing about a life otherwise pared down to work. Wesley had loved that hair. He used to say it was the first thing he'd seen of her, across a churchyard, catching the light. The town watched her and waited for her to crumble, because a woman alone on a horse outfit was supposed to crumble. And there is a kind of comfort the comfortable take in watching that. The banker, Mr. Aldous Fry, watched most closely of all, because the note came due at the end of the month, and a widow who could not pay was a property he could sell. And Aldous Fry had never in his life let sentiment stand between him and a clean transaction. So when the offers of charity came, Maren turned every one of them aside. The church ladies offered a collection. She thanked them and declined. Fry himself, in a show of public generosity that fooled no one, offered to carry her a while longer on terms that would have owned her in a year. She read the terms in 2 minutes and slid the paper back across his desk and said she'd find another way. The widow Doyle, the town agreed, had let her pride go to her head. Pride, they said, shaking their heads over their coffee, was a luxury a woman in her position could not afford. What none of them understood, what only one man would understand, was that the pride was not a luxury. It was the last load-bearing wall of her. Take it down, and the whole house came with it. The other way she found was Mr. Dorn. Dorn was a notions peddler who came through Sorrel Creek twice a year with a wagon of pins and ribbon and patent tonics, and who did a quiet sideline trade that the respectable pretended not to know about. He bought hair. Long, healthy, uncut hair fetched real money back east, where it was worked into the wigs and braids and switches that fine ladies pinned into their fashionable arrangements. A head of hair like Maren Doyle's, dark, thick, unbroken, falling past the waist, was worth, Dorn allowed when she asked him low and plain in the alley behind the mercantile, enough. Enough to make the last payment on the note, enough to keep the land and the horses in the rise where Wesley lay watching them. She made the arrangement for the following Saturday in the back room of the barber's, where it could be done private and clean. She told no one. She did not think of it as a tragedy. She thought of it as a trade, the one thing she owned outright, given freely for the thing she could not bear to lose. Hair grew back. Land, once gone, did not. It was to her mind a simple sum, and she did the arithmetic of it dry-eyed, the way she did everything now. She did not know that the news had gotten out, the way news does in a town that has nothing better to chew on, and that by Friday evening the whole of Sorrel Creek was murmuring over the latest, most delicious turn in the slow fall of the widow Doyle. Selling her hair, they said, and there was pity in it, and underneath the pity, that other thing, the small, ugly satisfaction of watching pride finally pay its price. Garrett Shaw heard it Friday night at the livery from a man who told it like a joke. Shaw ran cattle and a few horses on the broad ground east of the Sorrel Hills, and he was a solitary man, not unfriendly but unhurried, a widower himself these 6 years, and long past the need to fill silence with talk. He had known Wesley Doyle a little, and respected him, and he had watched the widow these 11 months from the proper distance a decent man keeps, had seen her at the mercantile with her chin level and her purse counted to the penny, had seen her turn aside the church collection with a courtesy that did not bend, had seen, where the rest of the town saw a woman failing, a person carrying an impossible weight without once asking to set it down. He did not laugh at the man's joke. He stood very still with a curry comb in his hand, and something turned over in him, slow and certain. The town saw a widow at the end of her rope. Garrett Shaw saw the only person in the county too proud to take a thing she hadn't earned, too proud to be carried, too proud to be pitied, proud enough to give up the most beautiful thing she had, rather than owe a single soul a favor. And it struck him, standing there in the lamplit livery, that he would be a poor kind of fool to let a person like that be cut down to nothing while the town watched and clucked. But he knew her well enough already to know one thing for certain. She would not take charity. Ride up to her door with the money, and she'd shut it in his face, and rightly. Whatever he did, it could not be a gift. It had to be a trade, fair and square, between equals, because anything less would do to her pride exactly what the scissors meant to do to her hair. So he was up before dawn on Saturday, and he did not ride to her house. He rode to the barber's. She was already there when he came in. She sat in the chair with her hair unpinned and falling all around her like dark water, and Dorn, the peddler, stood behind her with his good shears open, and the barber hovered, and the morning light came gray through the dusty window, and Maren Doyle's face was as composed and dry as a stone in a creek bed. She was not crying. She would not give the town that. She had her hands folded in her lap and her eyes level on the wall, and she was waiting for it to be over. "Hold off," Garrett said from the doorway. Dorn's shears paused. Maren's eyes came to him in the mirror, and there was no welcome in them. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "whatever it is, it'll keep." "It won't," he said. He took off his hat, not in pity, but the way a man does before he says something he means. "I didn't come to give you anything, ma'am. I know better than that. I came to do business, and the business won't keep, because you're about to sell the wrong thing to the wrong man for half what it's worth." She watched him, wary. "Go on." "Your husband left a stallion," Garrett said. "The Blood Bay. Wesley was 3 years building that line, and everybody in the county knows it. I've wanted that horse and his get since before Wesley passed, and I never asked because it didn't seem the time." He turned the hat slowly in his hands. "I'll buy him, and breeding rights to 2 of your mares at a fair price. And a fair price for that animal clears your note at the bank and leaves you working capital besides. I'm not offering you a penny of charity. I'm offering you market value for the best horse flesh in the Sorrels, and I'd be getting the better end of it, and you know horses well enough to know I'm telling the truth." The room was very quiet. Dorn lowered his shears. The barber found something to do with a towel. Maren Doyle sat in the chair with her hair falling around her and looked at the man in the doorway for a long moment. And what crossed her face was not relief. It was something more careful than that. The look of a proud person testing the floor before they put their weight on it. "You could buy that horse any day of the year," she said quietly. "You came today." "I came today," Garrett agreed, "because today's the day you are going to cut off something that can't be bought back and sell it to a man who'll braid it into a stranger's hair and forget your name by supper time. Wesley loved that horse. He'd want it working, not sold to clear a debt under a peddler's shears." He paused. "And he'd want you keeping the thing he loved looking at more than he'd want you keeping a horse." It was the nearest either of them came, that morning, to speaking of the hair as anything but a commodity, and it landed soft and true, and Maren Doyle's composure trembled for the first time in 11 months. Not into tears, but into something that looked, for half a breath, like being seen. She stood up out of the chair. She gathered her dark hair back over her shoulder with one hand, an old unconscious gesture, and she faced him not as a widow being rescued, but as a horse trader sizing up a buyer. "Fair price," she said. "Your figure, now, in front of witnesses." Garrett named it. It was fair, generous at the honest edge of fair, the way a man can be generous without insulting anyone's pride, and not $1 past it. The barber's eyebrows went up. Dorn, the peddler, who knew the price of most things, gave a small, respectful grunt. Maren considered it the length of 3 breaths, the way Wesley used to consider an offer, dry and unhurried. Then she put out her hand. "Done," she said. "You can collect him Monday. Come at a decent hour and I'll have coffee on." They shook, her calloused hand in his, and it was the plainest, most honest transaction Sorrel Creek had seen in a long while. And it left a proud woman with her land, her horses, her late husband's wishes honored, her hair still falling dark past her waist, and not one scrap of charity to choke on. Word got around, of course, it always did, but the story the town told that winter was not the one it had been hoping for. There was no broken widow to cluck over. There was, instead, a slow and stubborn thing that grew out by the Sorrel Hills, where a solitary rancher took to collecting more than just a stallion, where Monday coffees became a standing thing, and then a habit, and then the kind of quiet companionship that 2 careful, twice-wounded people build the only way such people can, plank by plank, with no rushing it. He never once pitied her. That was the whole of it, in the end. The town had offered her pity and called it kindness, and she had starved on it. Garrett Shaw had offered her a fair price and a straight back and the dignity of an even trade. And she had grown, in the warmth of being respected instead of pitied, into something even she had forgotten she could be, not a widow surviving, but a woman living. They married in the spring, under the rise where Wesley lay watching the horses, and Maren wore her dark hair down the way she had on the day across the churchyard, long and heavy and catching the light, exactly as it had always been. She kept it long all her life. It went gray and then white in its own slow time, the way honest things do. And when she was very old, and a young bride in the family asked her once why she had never cut it short the way the fashionable women did, Maren Doyle Shaw only smiled and ran a hand down the long, silver rope of it and said, "I came near to selling it once, child, to a town that would have called it humble of me. A man stopped me, not by paying but by seeing. He looked at what everyone else pitied, and he saw something worth dealing fair for." She wound the hair slowly around her hand, the way she had 10,000 evenings. Never let anyone talk you into trading away your pride to make them comfortable. The right ones won't ask you to. The right ones, she said, will only ever offer you an honest price.